being on this committee. So we'll start working through the agenda, shall we? So we'll start with apologies for absence.
We've got apologies from Councillor Mann and Councillor Guthrie. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And then we have confirmation of minutes for the meeting held on the 21st of March. So I don't think there were many of us here. So, I mean, I'm happy with them. Are we happy?
I'm happy with them.
Yeah, you are.
I am, yeah.
I'm happy to second that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay. So declarations of interest. So members are invited to declare any interest. Do you have any interest to declare, please? Very much. I don't think we have any items requiring urgent attention. And I don't think we have any items for the public forum. So we'll move on to the overview and scrutiny function. So most of us are new to this committee. So we thought it would be good just to introduce the committee and how we should work and the kind of work we can do. So I think we're handing over to our leader.
The deputy.
No, you go first.
Oh, I thought you were going first.
You go first.
Right, okay, I'm going
You're
to
the
go
leader.
first. I have to say, for me, this is my favourite committee. It is one of those committees that if something's really bugging you, you can ask them to come in and account for themselves. And it's a very powerful committee. You don't always think it is, but it is. It's a committee that looks at the work of the hub, and the hub pass work to overview and scrutiny, particularly if there's a task and finish group that needs to be set up. So, for example, we'd have a hub item and the hub member tends to come to the meeting. They will present what they want, and sometimes they will say, can we just look at it a bit more in depth? And then we would set up a task and finish group. The task and finish group, in the main, comes from members of this committee, but not always. You may have a member who specialises in the item that you're going to look into. You will have officers that you call into the committee, and you will have Mrs. Hoare, who will help you with the committee. And the chairman or vice chairman tend to be on them. We've looked into having organisations in that are statutory. So as third parties, it's a community safety partnership. They have to come and tell us what work they have done. We can question them on the work they have done. And they are then pushed through the system for another year. We also look at the fusion contract on behalf of the hub. So the hub I think it comes under Councillor Leach, under health and well-being, but the actual way the contract functions comes under ONS. And we have had a task and finish group on it, which was led by Councillor Lynn Daniel. And we did a really thorough job of their work. And it might be time now to do it again, because we did that in the first year last time round. So it may be an idea to look at how everything's functioning again. And it also gives you as members the opportunity to see how a big contract functions for the council and what we would like from fusion going forward. We can say, we think this bit's not so great. You know, the swimming pools are regularly monitored, and that can come from any one of us. I've done Meadowlands for years, and I'm going to meet with the new manager soon on Thursday, and that's always been my one because of my involvement with the swimming club as well. So it all combines for me. Live West tend to come in, We've learnt we need to be smarter when an organisation that Live West come in, because they would like to give you their presentation. And for those of you who've been here before, like Councillor Southcott and Councillor Vachon, you know darn well that actually we didn't find out anything we wanted to know. So we talked about this last time, and it would be agreed that we would be asking the questions and they would have cited them before where we want the answers, not them coming to tell us what they're doing, how they're doing, and all the rest of it. We don't want to know that. We want to know what they're doing for our residents and their tenants. So we've learnt that we just need to switch a few things. And as I say, to me, it is the most exciting committee to be on. And the one big thing I always took into account as chair, and Councillor Kimber, the chair now, will recognise that for some of you, this is your only place to be able to speak, because you're not on the hub and you're not on this and that. And this sometimes is when I go a bit off-piste, as I used to let members say if something that was concerning them, and if it is enough that we can put it on our forward plan, then we did. Because it is, as I say, the only place that you can speak up for something that you want to be looked into or discussed. And I'll be quiet now.
Thank you very much, Leader. That is fine. Thank you. So, in terms of, I won't talk through the slides. They're there for you all to read. But for me, the committee really needs to add value to the council. So, I think what the committee should be doing is looking at the ambitions of the council in terms of engaging with the community and how we work with the community and work with community groups. Perhaps importantly, and this is perhaps taking it the next step from where we got to last time, is become a bit of a think tank and generate ideas for the council that can be fed into lead members into hub committee that may eventually become policy. They may not, but actually if you don't generate the ideas, then we're relying on just the hub committee to come up with everything. And if we want it to be an inclusive and diverse council, we need everybody to input and generate ideas. If we could move on to the next slide, please, Cathy. So some of the logistics there, meetings are normally at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday. We need at least 8 people round the table, including the chair and vice chair, to be quorate, which means, and if we're not quorate, then effectively we could still hold the meeting, but we can't make any decisions. So it sort of defeats it. It doesn't count as an official meeting. So it needs at least 8 people sat round the table. So we're going to come on to it in a minute and talk about the actual agenda and where work can get onto the committee work programme. But effectively, any member can put forward a request for an item to come to Overview and Scrutiny Committee. And that then gets determined by the committee as to whether it's a worthwhile topic. So you can even have a debate about what goes onto the committee agenda. And we're going to cover that later to brainstorm some ideas of what you want to see on. So we're starting almost as a clean slate, in effect. I think the important thing for me is that it should be proactive, seen as proactive, and add value. Yes, it can be reactive. So if you are unhappy with the decision that the hub committee have made, you can call that decision in. Now, I would like to think I don't even know if it's ever happened in West Devon, actually, because that's the way the council works, is quite inclusive. So it tries to work and take everybody's views into account. But there is still the opportunity to call an item in, and this committee can then revisit and debate that decision. They can't change it. They can make a recommendation back to hub committee to say, have you considered these additional things based on that decision? But you don't make a decision. You make recommendations to the hub committee or to council. And the other important thing is you should be scrutinising the lead hub members, not the officers. So if you think of Parliament, when you see parliamentary committees, it's the Secretary of State for DLUC who is scrutinised by a committee of MPs, not the civil servant generally. So they're the ones held to account, and that's how it should work. And that actually is good for the hub committee because it actually puts the ownership on them. Officers are there to support that lead member in answering questions, but actually the role is to scrutinise. It might be Mandy as the leader, it might be Councillor Edmonds as head of resources, and it's their job to be able to answer your questions and refer to officers if they can't. Obviously it's a public forum, and then the last point that Mandy mentioned, the leader mentioned, was about task and finish groups. They're quite a powerful way of, rather than spending hours debating a topic, to say, do you know what, we need to discuss that in more detail. Let's create a task and finish group, small number of members, have a number of meetings, and that worked really well when we're looking at some of the fusion work last year. If we can move on, please. I think I've covered all of that, actually. There you go. I think just go back, sorry. Just go back. So one of the things that I've reflected on is sometimes we try to cram a lot into an overview and scrutiny agenda, and then what's happened is we've ended up either not going into a deep enough dive into the issues, or we've just basically ran out of steam and then rushed through stuff because we've been in 3 hours, I think, on occasions. And actually, I think when we look at the work programme, and it's something for you to think about, is whether we are better with no more than 3 items, but ideally 2 items, where we actually spend a good hour as a committee debating the issue and trying to really understand it, rather than have 5 or 6 items and spend 20 minutes, and by the time you reach the end of that, actually, you've run out of steam because you've run out of ideas, or you're just tired, basically. So that would be my view there. Sorry, Cathy, you can go on. So again, in terms of topics that you would want to consider, what's the value adds and benefits to our residents? What, you know, is there value? In that case, should we consider it? Who would be? How could we carry out this work? Is it a presentation? Is it a task and finish group first? What's the outcome we're looking to achieve? That's something that I think perhaps we've overlooked in the past. And how we would work and engage with the hub lead member or any partners in terms of doing that piece of work. And where's it come from? Why are we doing it? That's the important thing for me. One thing that we've not done that much is horizon scanning and looking at what other councils do, so best practice. And I think in terms of forming task and finish groups is looking at what other people do. There are 320 councils in the country. They all do roughly the same thing, and some will do it better than others. And everybody tends to do it slightly different and slightly nuanced for their area. And actually, you can learn a lot from what other councils can do. So it may be a task and finish group looking at other policies implemented by other councils as to how they've implemented them. And again, passing that advice back to the hub committee to then become our policy. And really, I'll leave it over to you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Mandy or for Mr. Molyneux?
Councillor Edmonds.
Councillor Edmonds.
I knew he'd have a question. I have to tell you all, Councillor Edmonds turns up to every one of these meetings, and he's always the best one to give answers to questions.
Well, thank you, Leader. I was already feeling slightly nervous after Mr. Molyneux's comments about scrutinising lead members, but I'm even more nervous after that kind introduction. But you've mentioned, rightly so, about this committee, sort of an ideas kind of thing, and task and finish groups. But Rob, I think I'm right in saying advisory groups would also play that role, horizon scanning. I seem to remember that's in the terms of reference for the advisory groups. But you know, all those things I would expect to see in the advisory groups as well. Would that be a fair And also a voice for people in their respective advisory groups as well. So it's perhaps the only opportunity to have a voice. I would like to think the advisory groups give that opportunity as well.
I'd agree with that, Councillor Edmonds, and I think this time round we formulated the advisory groups in a slightly different way, and that practice didn't really take place before. It might have done under yours, but I'm not sure it did under everyone else's. And it probably definitely occurred in Councillor Mott's, because she's another thorough person with overview and scrutiny and what work she does. You are correct in what you're saying, and it's kind of you to say what you have, but we also, it's because Councillor Edmonds, for example, he does the finance, we get to see the budget here first, the budget before it gets too far along, once it's got to its serious bit. You know, we'll have the budget, I can't think what Lisa calls the first budget meeting. Yeah, the budget workshop that we have. It will come to us, I think, in January, doesn't it?
I think we try and do the workshop in November from memory.
No, I'm saying where the budget actually comes here.
Then the budget would tend to form up from there and come to here. You're absolutely right, in the new year, and be finalised in February, I think.
Yeah. So it tends to come here first, and then anything that we've pointed out or noticed or whatever then goes back to the hub and will be amended, taken on board. One good example is last year is with the green waste collection. The officers needed to put the money up, and I think they suggested £49, and we as an Overview and Scrutiny Committee felt it was better to sell it as £52 as £1 a week. That's much easier to say than divvying up 49. So that went back through to the hub. The hub accepted that point after debate. Then it was put into the final budget and it was ratified at the full council meeting where the budget is finally agreed. So you can have things that start off here that can, as Mr. Molyneux has said, end up as council policy. So it is a good group to be on. And I know I'm heavily biased.
Do we have any other questions? Well, I've got a few hints and tips I can share. So I'll do those and then you might have some other questions. So this might seem a bit basic, but I didn't realise when I became a councillor. Has she got a question? Sorry, Councillor Saxby, do you have a question?
Yeah, so my question is, so if we can bring things to this committee, basically I'm just trying to understand what do we define as a thing. So let's say dumping sewage into the Tamar River is an issue and it happens to be a borough issue. Could that come forward? Or talking about business units and improvement to businesses or better Wi-Fi across the area, are these things, or should they be more, I don't know, yeah, like what are the limitations of what can be brought forward?
So taking the sewage item, Councillor Saxby, absolutely. Now, I guess the challenge would be if we wanted to bring South West Water, we can request that, and the committee can say we would like South West Water to come along and talk about pollution and what they're doing in terms of cleaning up pollution and stopping pollution. The challenge is getting them to engage. Some of these organisations are easier to engage with than others. I know across at South Hams District Council, we'd been trying unsuccessfully to engage with South West Ambulance Service about the long wait times for ambulances, and they just basically point blank refused to come and even respond to us. But we can certainly make that request, and we can write to them and contact them and ask them, we'd like you to come along and tell us, because we're interested in that, and more importantly, our residents are interested in whatever issue it is. So we can do all of those things, yes.
Okay, perfect. So it's sort of focused on, okay, thanks. That's really good to know. So it's more focused on bringing in an organisation or bringing something in so we can then conduct that scrutiny.
Yes, it is. It can still be on stuff that we do as a council, but I think if the focus is on things that are important to our residents, and we focus on what's important to our residents and communities, after all, we are elected to serve our residents and communities, and we charge them council tax for services we provide. So we've got services we provide and things we can do and influence.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So there's a couple of information sheets which we can share about the function of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, but they do have a lot of items which only apply to like Devon County Council, so we don't have all the powers that you might see in there. So I'll get back to my hints and tips. So the first one is to read the agenda. I didn't realise this. It took me several months of being a councillor before I realised that all the information is in there. I'm sure you won't make a mistake like that. But it's very important you read the agenda. If you don't understand something, then ask a friend. Make a note of any questions with a page number. If the question is complicated, then you like the lead member, then you might like to warn them of the question so they can be prepared. So,
And if you don't like the lead member?
Bring it on.
yeah, just tell the officer. And try in this committee, if we try and talk about things in the context of West Devon, so if you have issues in your ward, if you can perhaps speak to other councillors and see if they share the same issue, and then perhaps look at it across the borough rather than just your ward. And I found this is a useful tip. As you know, South Hams have the same officer team as us. We share the same officers. They have their Overview and Scrutiny meeting a week before us, so I like to watch it on YouTube. So then you can pick up some useful questions or prepare yourself. So that's always useful.
Best ones to do that about a fusion. Because you get all the questions out the way and their report always covers both areas.
Yeah, so that's always useful. And also, just to sum up, we're a friendly and cooperative group of people, aren't we? So, and we would like to hear from everyone. And there's no such thing as a silly question, because questions are one of the best ways to learn, aren't they? Do we have any questions on any of those subjects?
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify in terms of the shared officer team between South Hams and West Devon, it doesn't mean you have to have the same agenda and the same items. You can come up with your agenda, but as the leader pointed out, Fusion tend to come with, they deliver services to both councils, so they come with the same presentation, one that talks about West Devon leisure centres, one that talks about South Hams leisure centres. But in terms of other items, you can pick and choose. You don't have to say, well, South Hams are discussing this, so we'll discuss it. If you don't think it's relevant, then it's not relevant, so it's up to you.
You can learn a lot of interesting things by watching other councils. One of my favourites, East Devon District Council, just as a tip to you. So I think we're ready to move on to the next item on our agenda, which is a performance update to June 2023. Councillor Edmonds, would you like to come and present that?
Right, thank you, Chair. As part of the Council's performance management framework, key performance indicator reports have been presented to this committee on a 6-monthly basis. The report in front of you today covers Q1 performance, April to the end of June. Mr. Hawke and I feel that more frequent performance reporting to members would enable greater awareness and understanding of individual service area performance, and this is one of the report recommendations. This report forms part of a suite of performance reports designed by Mr Hawke and his team and supports the Council's corporate strategy, a plan for West Devon. The reporting framework is as follows. Quarterly integrated performance reports to the Hub Committee showing performance across the 8 corporate strategy themes, including a summary of strategic risk areas. Individual corporate plan theme reports presented to this committee by the respective lead member. And today's report, key service performance reports presented to ONS on a regular basis showing performance against agreed key performance indicators across a wide range of services. So, plenty of opportunity to keep in touch with how well the Council delivers its service to residents and an opportunity to question underperformance if applicable. So, Mr Hawke and I will now guide you through Appendix A, which is the key service performance, and we'll do our best to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are you going to guide us through, or do you want us to do a page at a time?
I mean, as it's the first meeting, we could go through a page at a time just so that members have got an opportunity to ask any questions on each of the measures, even if they are on track, if members are happy with that approach.
Are we happy with that? Would you like to guide us through? Thank you.
So, Kathy, how can I just present to the screen? I'm just thinking I should have checked in advance. Can I just join the teams? Hang on 2 seconds, I'll just jump on them. I'll put it on the screen if members are happy with that.
Would you like us to ask questions as you go through?
Happy to take questions as we go through. I think that's the best. Yeah. That's the best approach.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Excellent. No, there we go. There we go. Sorry about that, Chair. So just to build on what Councillor Edmonds has said to you so far, I mean, this is the sort of second tier of our performance management reporting. So what we do through the Hub Committee on a quarterly basis is really focus on performance against those objectives in the adopted corporate strategy. So those are some of the big ticket items that we're delivering. So those go through to the Hub Committee on a quarterly basis. The report in front of you today is our key service level performance, and I think it's fair to say these are by no means all of the performance measures that we look at as an organisation. Day in, day out as heads of service, we are monitoring performance and acting based on those performance levels, but these are very much the suite of measures that we consider to be probably of interest to our residents and you as councillors. And then finally, the sort of bottom tier of the pyramid there is really setting out how day-to-day we're managing individual performance within the council. So there's a pyramid there in terms of how we manage performance. I mean, are there any questions on that generally before we move on to the actual performance measures? Excellent. Okay, so the next page, so page 13 of the agenda pack, is an attempt to demonstrate on a page, so for a quick glance, how we're doing against some of those key performance measures. As you'll see, it's quite a crude way of doing it, but green smiley face means we're on track, so performing at or above the required level of performance. Red sad face, more work to do. I think it's fair to say, so we're not on target. I'll skip ahead. So the first measure within the pack is percentage of, and apologies.
Right. Do you mind if I interrupt? The leader has a question.
On the previous page, down at the bottom with enforcement cases, that they're still not on track. I thought we now had a full team of enforcement officers, etc., and that we were much more on track than we were. Well, what that indicates, sorry.
Certainly. I mean, we will come back to these as we go through the pack, Chair. So each of the individual measures will be within there. And when we get to that point, I mean, I'll defer that to Mr. Powell as the director for, do you want to take it now? Or...
Chair, it would be better if we take that when we get to the actual slide and I can explain the position then.
you, Leader. So the first page is percentage of FOI requests, and I'm conscious we've thrown in some definitions here, and we should have spelt it out given it's the first report, but this is freedom of information requests. So members of the public, businesses, and anybody really can submit requests to the council for information that we have 20 working days to respond to. And that target is set by the ICO, which is the Information Commissioner's Office. We'll clarify that in future reports. Fair to say we are below target on this measure. The target we have set is 90%, which is recommended by the Information Commissioner's Office. And our performance for this period is at about 76, 77%. So below target. When we're looking at freedom of information requests, we really focus on responding to those requests from our residents, because we do get quite a few requests from national businesses sort of asking for various information to help with their future pipelines, but we always prioritise those from residents. So while it's not on track, we are taking steps to address that. And as you'll see in the report, there's quite a large number during this period to Revenues and Benefits team. And as part of the current Revenues and Benefits service review, the head of service is currently looking at putting some specific resource to focus on responding to those freedom of information requests. So we hope to see that level of performance continue to increase. I'll stop there for any questions, Chair.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm fascinated by this sort of thing, so I'm afraid there's going to be lots of questions from me. So first of all, a sort of methodological question, and looking at the graph. So it's very useful to have a bit of context, but I would argue it would be even better to have at least a couple of years previously. So it's nice to see the blue line there. But often, I mean, I'm aware that West Devon is quite a small borough. If you look at the national statistics, we're very small. And so you're going to see quite a lot of variability because the numbers are small. So that's just a sort of helpful comment. The other thing here, it's really good to see the numbers. So instead of only focusing on the percentage that have been completed on time, it would be great to know of those 36 that weren't completed on time, is there any sort of average length that you could give us for that? Or, so that we know, because it could be that you just missed it by 1 or 2 days, in which case no one's going to be too worried around the table. But, and then again, in terms of informing practice for the organisation, if there are a few that are taking ages, then what's the problem there? And I know about the FOI requests, that some of them can be a bit mischievous, some of them are a bit borderline as to whether the organisation actually has to respond to them. So I think particularly when there's a red, it would be good to have a little bit more detail. So just some thoughts there. And any comments you've got, I'd be very interested.
Absolutely, and we can certainly take that on board for future reports to this committee, because we do have the information, so we can certainly set that out for you, including a bit of a time profile. I think it's fair to say a large chunk of them are responded to within a few days late, but there are some that go on for a few weeks because of the complexity of some of the requests, where we do liaise with the customer around those, but we can certainly set that out in future reports. Okay, if no other questions on the freedom of information request one, we'll move on. So the next graph, again, it goes back to a little bit like the previous comment, that we have so few complaints to the Ombudsman that it can be a massive swing in terms of the performance. So this measure is really where a customer has complained to the council and they've exhausted our complaints process. So they've been through the stage 1 complaints process, they're still not happy with our response, they go through our stage 2 complaints process where it's considered by a different officer, they're still unhappy, and then they go to the Ombudsman. During this period, 2 complaints went to the Ombudsman and neither were investigated. And those are related to, and we find this in most years, primarily related to planning applications, and somebody's not happy with the decision that the planning committee has reached, and that is not a matter that the Ombudsman can consider. So that's why you'll see a number of complaints that go to the Ombudsman that just aren't investigated because they fall outside of their remit. Happy to take any questions. Oh, yes, sorry, Councillor Evans.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Wall. I'll just make a comment there. when Mr. Hawke and I reviewed this, I did wonder whether this is perhaps the best measure and whether we should perhaps consider reporting on complaints from our customers, from our residents, service complaints that may give a better indication as to the satisfaction or otherwise of our services. That is kind of, the Ombudsman, as Neil has said, we only get a couple a year. So I'm not sure it's particularly the best measure. So that is something, if you agree, then we may consider changing that or adding in customer complaints. I call them service complaints. Has anyone got any thoughts on that?
So I think this is a really good example of how the committee could work. So as the lead member, you could ask the committee to effectively look at complaints. And if indeed we presented those figures and it said that both of those complaints had been upheld by the Ombudsman, you may decide that you would like to deep dive into, well, what's going wrong? Let's have a look at complaints in detail. Let's have the data that shows all the detail that shows how many complaints we've got by service area, how long it's taken us to respond, what's the, how many were satisfied, how many then went on to stage 2, and so on. So it's exactly, it could work either way. You could look at that figures and go, we're not happy with that, we'd like to look into more detail. Or, as Councillor Edmonds has suggested, he could ask you to look at complaints and decide whether complaints needs to be revisited in terms of the KPI. So these are the sort of things that you as a committee can work with lead members on.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Casbolt?
I would just like to, with what Councillor Edmonds has just said, I think if it's not in this presentation, it would certainly be advised to have the service feedback and how many complaints are coming through, so that we can, as a council, decide if there's areas of the council that need to have more focus put on them, if we're finding a trend.
I would agree with that. Yeah, definitely. I should perhaps have checked to make sure that that operationally is not too arduous in terms of producing. That sounds like a lot of MI, but I think an overview of initially numbers, and as Mr. Molyneux has suggested, if those numbers suggest that there may be an underlying issue, then there's an opportunity to dig a bit deeper at the request of this committee, but at least you've got an opportunity to do that based on some information. So it's just a suggestion that the committee may wish to consider.
I was just going to say, I think those things are a bit complicated though, aren't they? Because we have a senior leadership team who are responsible for monitoring these things as well. We also have hub members, lead hub members. And also, if we keep asking for information, it's going to take more and more officer resource, which is going to make it more difficult for them to do their job.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Some of these, they're operational matters, so we must let the officers manage. That's absolutely correct. But maybe just an overview in terms of numbers would be sufficient at a high level. I don't think we need to get into details of every complaint and whether it was upheld or not. That would become particularly onerous. Maybe just like this, an overview just to give an indication, and that would give us some trends to whether complaints are increasing overall, decreasing, etc. But certainly not down into finer detail unless there's a particular issue identified, which would then perhaps justify a more in-depth investigation of that particular area.
Yeah, I was just going to say we can certainly provide that if committee wants it. I think we've got the systems in place. We use a system called Liberty, and pretty much at a touch of a button we can get that information out of the system and into a report for you. So we can certainly do that.
Thank you, Councillor Southcott.
That would be very good. It's an area that raises concern within the public at times, and how we deal with these things. So more information would be helpful.
Councillor West.
It's like a lot of these things, it's statistics, downlines and statistics, and when you're only talking about 1 or 2 cases, then to some extent it's not significantly important, it's not significance to the occurrence. And so, you know, this is a performance indicator, considering it may only happen 1 or 2 things, to some extent it is an exception. It'd be better that, to some extent, individual cases could actually be brought when they're there, if deemed necessary. So I would suggest, as a performance indicator, this isn't a good performance indicator for us to be looking at, and there may well be other things we're better spending our time on, potentially.
Anything else on this item?
Sorry, I was just going to say, we will certainly look at that for the next meeting. And the Ombudsman do prepare an annual report, which is considered by the Audit Committee. So, you know, the information on Ombudsman complaints will be considered at that point in time. Okay, members, carrying on through. So the next one, percentage of major applications determined within 13 weeks or with an agreed extension of time. Now, again, just to apologise, we just all take it for granted that major applications, but actually we should spell out this is planning applications, which it doesn't actually say that in the narrative, so we'll update that again in the next version. Mr. Powell is the Director for Planning, so I don't know if you wanted to just quickly walk through the high levels, or just members ask any questions in terms of the major applications determined within 13 weeks.
Can I worth just defining what a major is, when it becomes, you know, the difference between a major and a minor?
Yeah, I can certainly do that for you, Councillor Edmonds. So there's various definitions, but basically a major application is 9 or more dwellings. It's industrial land of a certain size. So it's basically something that's major. It's not a household extension. We only receive a few major applications each year. They're the more complex applications. They take time, and that's why we give them 13 weeks to determine those.
Any questions? I think we're fine.
Okay, thank you, members. Moving on to percentage of non-major planning applications determined within 8 weeks or with an agreed extension of time. Target for this one is 80%, and we set a target above the national target, which is actually 70%, with our performance at 86% during this period, which, as the narrative says there, a good level of performance that continues to be above the national target. But there is a slight drop-off in performance compared to the last 2 quarters as a result of staff turnover.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you. So this is my love of numbers, again, as usual. So again, making the point that we're quite a small borough, and it's quite interesting, you know, the way that we would set a target in terms of the national target. So another way of doing it that I'm just putting forward for consideration by the officers and by Councillor Edmonds is to think about having a sort of benchmark group. So to look at other rural areas that are the same sort of size as West Devon and to say what is a realistic target. And the reason I'm proposing this is not just for a sort of numbers game, but because we want to drive our performance to be as good as possible for our residents. So we really want to say what's realistic for a council like us to do, and can we push ourselves? Because otherwise we're just going to be congratulating ourselves when we're actually putting ourselves in the pot with much bigger authorities.
So previously there was a family group which we used to operate with, which compared similar authorities, and we could certainly look at that. We do look across Devon to see our performance with respect to similar authorities, Mid Devon, North Devon, Torridge, and so on. I think the important thing with this is that there's a balance point at which the amount of resource we would need to apply to get much higher would become prohibitive in terms of cost. And the other point to make, I suppose, is around extensions of time. So the key point here is this is the indicator that is used nationally to measure our performance. So across all authorities, as you say. And one of the things we're trying to do is to drive down the number of extensions of time that we ask for. Sometimes we ask for the extension of time, sometimes the applicant asks. So we're trying to get to the point where actually we get as many of these done without an extension of time within the 8-week period. So that's something we're at the moment measuring operationally at officer level. and I would hope in the future we bring to members to better scrutinise as well. But it's early days in terms of gathering that data. Hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Would I be right in saying there is a statutory target in here as well? So we have to achieve whatever that is. That the statutory target, the 80%?
The target from government is 70%. We've put it 10% above that to make sure that we are operating in the right area, and we're achieving above that. So there's two measures that the government look at in terms of this, and there is a process called designation, where if you do not perform to the right level, then you have the situation where the Secretary of State could ask for the Planning Advisory Service to come in and operate your service. So that's if you're regularly performing below that 70%. Now, some authorities bounce around the 40 and 50% and still don't get designated, but it is a real risk. So for us, ensuring that we are well above that 70 is the primary importance, and then trying to achieve higher within available resources is obviously something we try to do as well.
Do we happen to know the other districts? Have we got a feel for what their target is?
I don't know about whether they have the internal targets, but again, we can check that quite simply by doing a little look across other authorities. Most people, the published data is always against that 70% target, and then you either fall in the first top quartile or so on.
Mr. Molyneux's got a point to make.
Well, two actually. Just based on what Mr. Powell said there about planning designation, when he says about the planning inspectorate operating planning, they would take away this council's ability to make planning decisions and decide for us. So it is a really critical target that we measure within an inch of its life, in effect. So it's absolutely fundamental to us. But picking up on what you said, Councillor Elliott, about comparing with other councils, so for something like planning, it's quite easy to do because everybody measures against a national target. For some of the other KPIs, they are unique to us. So it's less easy to compare apples with apples. And also the other problem in terms of we're doing our best to try and make these KPIs timely so that you will get the next set of quarterly KPIs effectively in October after the quarter to September. If we start waiting to compare with other councils, we're sort of looking on published figures and so on, and they can sometimes, in the take of waste, for example, they are almost 12 months behind before waste figures are published in terms of some of the amount of recycling per council. So it's about what's timely as well as trying to compare. So just to make that point, really.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions? I think we're okay.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Moving on to enforcement cases. So planning enforcement cases open at the end of the quarter. So as at the end of June, our target was to have 128 applications or under, and during the period, at the end of the period, 139 active planning enforcement cases. As you can see there, during the quarter, 47 cases were received and 43 were closed. So a slight drop in performance from the last quarter.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you tell me why it's showing a baseline of 0 between quarter 1 and quarter 2? I don't understand that. The lists that come round show that there was stuff that goes back quite a long way, actually.
Mr. Powell's just whispering that we weren't actually collecting the data then in a standard format, so it shouldn't even show on there as a line. I'll be honest, it should have begun at the end of quarter 2.
Any other questions? Powell?
Just to pick up on the leader's question earlier on, I mean, the 120 is a target we've sort of came up with. There's no precise science to it other than the amount we get in and the amount we tend to deal with, and we want to try and balance that point out. There will always be a caseload of enforcement cases. What we're trying to focus on now is communication to make sure that members are aware of what's going on in their areas by sharing that list and offering for a conversation with the enforcement team. And the second part is we are looking now to actively change the triage process. So rather than bringing in the cases arrive and they sit in the system for a little while, and then we determine, you know, if they're not absolutely urgent, like a listed building or a tree being taken down with a TPO, then they might stay in the system for a while before it's determined whether we'll do anything. And all that does is frustrate the person who's made the complaint, because actually we're not going to deal with it because we can't, but we don't tell them for a month. So what we want to do is bring that triage system to the beginning. So if we can't help, or if it's not a priority, it's a minor issue that ultimately we will never take action on, it's not in the public interest, it's not something within our enforcement concordat, we would then advise the person quickly. And the ones that do need some attention, we would prioritise them and then make sure we deal with those in priority order. So we're hoping to bring the number down, but also to provide a better service to the public in terms of informing them early about whether or not we're going to deal with something. So hopefully we'll see an improvement from that angle.
I just wondered what actions have been taken to actually close off a lot of the long-standing ones, and some of those that are actually going forward for legal action that are not progressing speedily or timely.
So if their cases are actually, if we're taking enforcement action, whether that's service of notice or waiting for the applicant, if we've invited an application, then some of those can take a considerable period of time. I'll be honest, our legal service at the moment is under pressure. So some of the enforcement cases and our ability to push them forward quickly, it is difficult. Again, we try and prioritise the ones that have the biggest impact on the public. Cases that are open and are old should be being closed down now. We're trying to work from both ends, deal with the ones that are coming in and close down the ones that are out of date. You know, I think members probably recall 2 or 3 years ago, this number was a lot higher than 139. So we've made good progress, still work to be done. But we're out to recruit for legal officers at the moment. We're advertising for 5 lawyers. That's, you know, at the moment the team is under a lot of pressure, so we're using locum lawyers. We need that stability in the team to be able to progress some of the enforcement cases quicker than we can at the moment.
Thank you. The leader has a question.
The leader's going to make a comment. Drew's surname.
Mr. Powell.
Mr. Powell, sorry. Is quite correct. We used to have over 400 live cases. So the figure has come down dramatically. The bit I was going to add that Mr. Powell didn't really emphasise, that is good to emphasise, is when you receive the list, I think we receive them weekly or quarterly, it's one of the two. I know I've received 2 this year, so in this municipal year, so I think it's 8 weeks. But my previous ward member, and I know my current one will, we used to have a meeting with the officers to go through them, because sometimes an extra bit of local knowledge that you may have about something can help speed it up. We don't get involved, but it's just that bit of sharing knowledge, because as the report says when it comes out, it is not for discussion out of council. You must not approach Joe Bloggs and say, you're on the naughty step. We don't get involved at all like that. But sometimes we just have a bit of local information that we can share with the officer, or they can share with us. And if you're in, you know, a multi-member ward, it's a really helpful way of getting those numbers down to assist the officers.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other questions on that one. Oh, yes, I do. Councillor Vachon.
Thank you, Chair. Bearing in mind, obviously, every one of these cases is totally different and unique, but is there an average sort of time that we could put on these to determine if there is a statistic we can build into this?
I think it would be quite difficult, because I think the variation is so huge. You know, some of them will be closed down within a couple of days, especially under the new triage system, and others can take literally years because they go through the courts. So you probably end up with an average that didn't really help. What might be worth doing when we put the new triage system is to deal with the cases that have come in and have been closed immediately. to show the number that are coming through the process, and then the time taken for the ones that we are able to take action on would be a better statistic, I think. So we can certainly look at doing that, but at the moment it would probably be a bit of a random time period that probably wouldn't inform members. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Okay, moving away from planning now and to housing. So the next measure is the average temporary accommodation use per month. So this is the average number of families in temporary accommodation over the period at any one time, and you'll see there that we haven't actually set a target. We've just said we'd like to see that reducing trend, so a reducing amount of time spent in temporary accommodation. And as the narrative says, the winter pressures are less prevalent in West Devon due to lower numbers of rough sleepers. I won't read it all out, but I'm happy to take any questions in terms of temporary accommodation use per month. All in all, slightly higher than previous quarter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it would be quite useful here to know how many people you're talking about. Families. I mean, is that groups of 4, 6, one person? It would give it perhaps a bit more context to know how many actual people this involved.
Okay, I don't have that information to hand, but certainly for the next report, we'll get that information for you.
Thank you. And Councillor Elliott?
Thanks. Yes, so I think it's worth us paying particular attention to the next few slides because housing has been identified as a real priority for this council. And so partly building on what Councillor Johnson has just said, it's really understanding the sort of human nature of this. And so for me, this doesn't seem like the most helpful statistic. And it's quite difficult to understand what is meant by average number over the period at any one time. Because if you had 48 families at one time and 0 at another, and what is the time period? Is it, because in a way it's every night you have a certain number of families who are in temporary accommodation. So for me, a more useful thing is to know how long are people in temporary accommodation. What's sort of median, after so many weeks, 50% of people have been moved into permanent accommodation, and there are ways of doing that fairly simply with databases. So, I mean, there's quite a lot here. I don't want to get into the detail. It's not relevant in this sort of setting, but I think this would need looking at again. But you've obviously got more understanding behind the figures, so if you want to comment on that, it'd be great.
Absolutely, thank you. And I wonder, and with the conversation around the overview and scrutiny work programme earlier, whether that's something you'd want to have a work programme for. I mean, what I should have said at the beginning of this, there's a suite of measures here that covers all council services, and short of having a cast of thousands of officers on the call, we're not going to be able to answer all the questions, but maybe that's something you'd want to consider for your future work programme too, and we can certainly get one of the housing officers along to explain the story behind the data. I think that's important rather than a raw number. Obviously, that's your decision as a committee, but it may well be worth exploring.
Councillor West?
For me, it would be, and also another interesting statistic would be about the length of time a particular family's been spent in. If we're talking 12, that's great. And if they're only in there for a month, that's fantastic. However, of those 12, how many have been stuck in that accommodation for over a year, perhaps, or 6 months? So I think we do need to drill down that on a little bit more from that point of view.
Do you want to comment on that? Yeah, sorry.
Can I just strengthen what Councillor West has just said and say, and how many times within that temporary accommodation they've been moved? Because some temporary accommodations only weeks, then you move to another temporary accommodation, and that does happen to people, unfortunately.
Can I just comment on that? So I think the visibility is a big problem because where I live, most people are sofa surfing or they're sleeping in sheds in the wood or in tents in the wood, and these people will never appear on these statistics, will they? Sorry, Councillor, Mr. Powell.
Perhaps something to think about a wider role of the committee is under the present plan for West Devon, one of the roles of the committee is to scrutinise a particular theme. So housing is a theme within a plan for West Devon. And what will happen is the lead member will come along and do a detailed presentation on the progress against the corporate plan on housing. That's when a lot of this detail comes forward, because there is a lot of statistics. And I totally agree, that indicator is one that I struggle to understand. And Mr. Hawke and I think the second one is a little bit more informative. But there is a process where members will be able to see a lot more detail and statistics around the performance. So length of time in accommodation, numbers of people. We do have some people in temporary accommodation for a considerable period of time because of their circumstances. One of the focuses we have is on prevention, is preventing people going in the first place, so early intervention. But there's a number of different sort of strands to the approach around dealing with homelessness that would be presented through that process. So hopefully that helps members know that you'll get a bit more detail through those deep dives on the actual thematics.
Okay, let's keep going. So the next one is also around housing. So the percentage of cases where homelessness was prevented, the target is 60%. So of those that approach us as presenting as homeless, what percentage of those do we prevent them actually falling into the statutory homelessness duty? And we are performing at 60% of those applications. So 50 applications were taken, resulting in 30 successful outcomes, and that may well be that we've worked with them and that they found suitable accommodation with family, or suitable alternative accommodation through working with the landlord. So again, happy to take any issues, but as we say there, we're seeing an increase in notices given due to mortgage issues, cost of living biting. I think it's well documented through the TV and through what we're seeing on the ground, that we are seeing more and more mortgage issues and tenants approached with affordability issues.
Thank you. For a change, you'll be pleased to know this won't be a numbers question. It's a more substantive question. So we're all aware of the Homes for Ukraine scheme, and that West Devon has done a fantastic job in supporting Ukrainians and the hosts of Ukrainians. But I just don't know if there's any sort of intelligence as to whether this sort of percentage might go up, or the numbers of applications might go up, because the months are moving on. There's no resolution to the Ukraine crisis, and certainly in our very local area, we can see people, hosts coming to the end of the time that they're prepared to look after people. So it may be that the information isn't here right now, but it would just be interesting to know if you do have any insights. Thanks.
Absolutely. I think we are seeing positively a number of Ukrainians actually securing their own rented accommodation, which is a positive, but you're absolutely right, that's not the case all of the time. As a council, we are looking to secure some accommodation or some properties through the housing, I believe it's the Local Authority Housing Fund, which is a specific fund the government have set up to enable us to purchase properties for the initial accommodating of Ukrainians who find themselves without anywhere else to live. I think, is it 5 in West Devon? 5 properties in West Devon. But we have a support team in place, so the council has a dedicated support team in place working with Ukrainians and helping them resolve any housing issues and any other issues they may have, working closely with Citizens Advice as well. So we're doing all we can. I haven't got the hard and fast figures, but we can certainly get an update out certainly via the member bulletin in terms of how that's going.
Thank you, Mr. Molyneux and Councillor West.
There is a report, I think, coming to the next hub committee, which gives an update on the Homes for Ukraine and the houses and the status and where we think we're at. So that is constantly monitored. So, my only other observation is the other questions relating to temp accommodation. Exactly the same questions were asked by the South Hams committee. So again, if this committee decided they wanted to look into temporary accommodation and exactly a bit more detailed, it's quite a reasonable thing to do, because it is the natural, it links, as Mr. Powell said, then into the whole housing crisis and the lack of housing. So it wouldn't be unreasonable to consider that as a topic.
Specific point, I was at a parish council meeting. One of the parish councillors are actually hosting a Ukrainian family, and they said directly to me, do you know what is happening in terms of timeframes and that? I'm just not going to ask the question. Is the authority in contact with every Ukrainian family and host to monitor that situation?
We certainly are if they've arrived through the Homes for Ukraine scheme. But because we have a duty to provide sort of wraparound support for the Homes for Ukraine scheme. If, however, they've arrived through the family visa scheme, then we may well not be, because we don't get the information in terms of who's arriving through that scheme from central government. But if they've come through the Homes for Ukraine scheme, which the vast majority have, then absolutely we're in touch and they will have a dedicated caseworker. Thank you.
Councillor Daniel?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to know if you've got any information or statistics on the 20 homeless people that we weren't able to help. You know, what was the outcome for them, and could we show that somewhere as well? Thank you.
So when Mr. Powell and I were presented with these figures, that was exactly the question that we asked. That's great. What about the other 20? Because so we asked exactly the same question. And the answer is, we don't have that detail at this point, do we? Well, it's a really valid question. That's great. We've sorted out 30 and we've hit our target, but what about the other 20? And I suspect, as the chair said, that's the sofa surfers and stuff like that we didn't sort out, and they're just doing their own thing to try and provide it, but I have no evidence of that.
Thank you very much. Any other questions?
Okay, I'll keep going because I'm conscious we've still got a few here. So the next one, employment estates occupancy rates. So this is self-explanatory, I think, but the council has a number of employment estates, and this is a sort of a report in terms of how many of those how much of that space is occupied. And we're at 90.86% with the target of 90%. And as you'll see there from the narrative, we've seen a consistent upward trend, which I think is positive given the position nationally, and and the impact that COVID certainly had on businesses and tenancies and all of those sorts of things. So the fact that we stay at 90% is quite a positive. Take any questions on that one?
Don't see any.
Did you want to come in on this one, Chair?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hawke. Really, if I'm honest, I'm questioning whether this is really helpful or relevant to this committee. I think, I think it's a limited value. You may disagree, so I'll throw that out there as to whether or not you're interested in how good we are issuing temporary events notices, or whether we think we could drop it off and perhaps replace it with something else.
Is anybody interested in that figure?
Can I just ask, when we talk about temporary events notices, what specifically are we talking about?
So these are applications for events where we might be selling, there might be sales of alcohol, live music, those sorts of events. So up to, I think it's about 499 attendees. So relatively large events, up to 500 attendees, that you have to apply for your license if you're going to sell alcohol or late night refreshments, I think is the technical term, or have live music. Thank you.
Mr. Molyneux?
I don't disagree with what Councillor Edmonds said. However, because there's a statutory statistic on here and we have a statutory duty in terms of granting a licence, the implication of us not granting a licence is, by default, the applicant would just be granted. So if we fail to review, either turn down or agree a temporary event notice, if we don't do it within the statutory time frame, then by default it's granted. So you could say, well, there's nothing to see here, and there isn't, but that's because we're doing a good job. But it's important that we do a good job. So it's almost just one for, let's keep noting it, but we don't, and we've automated this a lot. So we've done a lot of work with automating the system so that what used to be quite a human process in terms of printing them off, looking at them, filling a form in, inputting it, is now all automated, and literally the human intervention is at the end to press approve. So that's what we've done a great piece of work to improve our performance to 100%, but it's important that it stays there.
Can I just say on that then, would it be appropriate to also consider the number of applications which have been rejected? To give us an idea, because we're, you know, yes, we're saying 100% accepted to being done within a day, but in terms of relation to rejection, you know, then it gives us an idea of context for it.
Definitely. I think there's been some really positive feedback from members in terms of how we can enhance this report further, and I think including those numbers as part of the narrative for this report, absolutely we can do that.
Just as a side issue, we don't get told as ward members that a licence has been granted in our area, do we? Because it's not unusual to have somebody in tears on the phone at 10 o'clock at night, and we didn't even know the event was happening, but...
I don't know. I don't get involved with that side of it, I'm afraid, Chair.
I don't think we do get told.
Worth noting.
We could put that in the minutes and we can get an answer for members.
Yeah, I mean, if it's an automated process, it might be easy to send an email to the
That's
ward
exactly
member.
what I was thinking.
Yeah, it would be quite nice to know. Okay. Any other questions on that point?
Noted, Chair.
Okay, moving on, and if you're happy, I'll take the next two together. So average number of days to process new housing benefit claims and average number of days to process change in circumstances for housing benefit claims. So as you can see there, the first one, new housing benefit claims, target is 17 days. So we set that target below the national sort of target. I just think about 20, I think it says 20 days there in the report. Because it's important that we get those processed as quickly as possible for our residents. So, and we're performing that for the quarter at 15 days to process a new housing benefits claim. Please note in the narrative that actually in June, that's come right down to 6.6 days to process a new benefits claim. And similarly, with the change in circumstances for housing benefits, target is 6 days and performance at 4.7 days. Happy to take any questions on that, Chair.
Councillor Elliott.
Yeah, so again, this is one that I think is really interesting and important because it's housing, and as you say, these are the most vulnerable people who are relying on us for housing benefit. We might want to talk about this outside this meeting in more detail. I sort of noted in some of the other slides, it was really good that you actually gave like the denominator, you gave the number. So I looked at the national data for this, and I noted that it was only like 58 across a whole quarter for West Devon. Now, this is a little bit out of date because it was reported nationally, as Mr. Molyneux said. Those data are always a bit out of date, but it gives you a sense that it's not hundreds, it is, you know, a few dozen per quarter. And so you are going to see quite a lot of variability month by month, depending on the complexity. So I just think I don't want to get bogged down in this now, but this doesn't seem to me to be the most helpful way of reporting it. And I also note that there's about 10 times as many applications for changes in housing benefit as there are for new housing benefit. So we might just want to think about that sort of in a slightly different way.
So I agree with you about the denominator because that 6.6 days could have been we only had 2 claims in the month, whereas in the previous month we might have had 30 claims. So you're quite right that the denominator is relevant. I know we've organised a session in terms of benefits for an all-member briefing session, I think at the beginning of September. So in terms of the explaining why we get more changes of circumstances and stuff like that, because obviously universal credit has a huge impact on claimants because anybody who claims new, unless they are pension age, and there's a couple of other criteria, all go through universal credit. But if you're already on housing benefit and you've got an existing claim and your income changes, then that's where the change of circumstances still come through the DWP, but we have to action any changes for us. So it's relatively complicated, but we can cover it in that session.
Any other questions?
Okay, I'll continue through. So the next two, again, we can probably skim through these, but council tax collection rates, target 25% because we're first quarter of the year, and performance 29.05%, and non-domestic rates, again, a quarterly target, 25, so the next report, that target will be 50%, and it increases throughout the year, but performance at 36.42%. To add on that, Councillor Edmonds, I know it's your portfolio.
No, really just how impressive that is in terms of considering we're in the midst of a cost of living crisis, and yet our residents are, able to pay their council tax and their business rates. So I think that's hugely impressive. That was the case throughout COVID. That's consistent. So that is really excellent. 1%. Every 1%, I think, is worth about £51,000 to the authorities. So these are really important figures. But I would also say that there are good support systems beneath that in terms of helping people who are perhaps finding it difficult with their paying their council tax. Council tax reduction scheme would be amongst that. And again, I go back to what Mr. Molyneux was saying with the benefits briefing, that I'm sure that'll be covered under that. But that's useful information for us as members to have conversations with those people who perhaps need some help with this.
I was just going to add, and correct me if I'm wrong, Councillor Edmonds, that figure that is above the 25% is for people who pay their council tax in full every year at the beginning of April, isn't it? Does that cover those residents, and that's why it goes above? Yeah.
That's why it's slightly above the target for the first quarter, yeah.
Any other questions?
Okay, now moving on to missed bin collections. So there's a national target of under 80 missed bin collections per 100,000 collections due. So the target is 80, and performance during this period was 44 missed collections per 100,000, which is good when you consider Q3 last year. We were at about 750, I think it was, Steve, wasn't it? So any questions on that, please direct them to Mr. Molyneux.
I just want to say how much nicer it is having that kind of number than it was when we were struggling. Any other comments?
Okay, and the next one is household recycling rates. So target for the council we've set is 57%, and as you'll see there, the target, the actual performance is below target. So that one is red, just over 50%. And I think it's fair to say it's broadly been below target for quite some time, other than, I believe it was the Christmas period, Steve, where it peaks because of the amount of recycling that goes out. But again, any questions on that or anything you'd like to add, Steve, as the director?
To give some context here, the best councils achieve about 63-64%, and that's the best in the country. The worst councils, which tend to be a lot of the inner city councils, are down at 30-odd%. So this is going to be one of, may have seen the announcement that from the Department of, from DLUC, that they're bringing out the Office of Local Government. And one of the set of statistics that they're going to look at in the first instance is waste statistics, particularly in terms of household recycling rates and residual waste tonnages. So we've looked at where West Devon is based on the 2021 performance, because they're over a year behind, and West Devon is firmly right in the middle, slightly towards the higher end, but we've still got a huge amount to do, because the whole waste hierarchy is about reducing the amount of waste in the system in the first place, reusing, and then recycling. So recycling is the last level. And I attended a presentation at the Local Government Association conference that basically said if we want to hit our environmental targets, we need to reduce the amount of waste in the system by 50%. So it's not just going to be enough to actually recycle more, which we do need to do. We've actually got to reduce. So in terms of the campaigns going forward, we've got a waste working group that the Hub Committee has now convened, and one of the things that they'll be looking at is the policies and the communication around how we follow that waste hierarchy of reduce, reuse, recycle. That's all I'd say on that.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott and then Councillor Viney.
Thank you. Can I just ask, 57% of what? The complete volume of refuse collected?
I was going to ask the same sort of thing, but can you just say in a tiny bit more detail? So is it to do with like tonnage of recycling and tonnage of the amount of, yeah, because it doesn't necessarily mean that people are not recycling things that they could. It's just what percentage of waste is recycled. Is that right?
So it is all tonnages. So every quarter we have to submit to a national portal the amount of residual waste collected, the amount of recycling collected in tonnes, and we break that down in terms of recycling. We break that down by glass, we break it down by card, paper, plastics. So we have to send that, food waste as well, garden waste, even though it's a paid for service, we still have to submit all those tonnages, and that's how this figure is calculated. So it's collected against everything. Oh, Councillor Daniel.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. I just wanted to share that extended producer responsibility and the deposit return schemes that are coming in next year, hopefully mid-next year, will make a lot of difference to how we calculate recycling and may even reduce our recycling rates, but it means that there's less waste being produced in the first place. And Surfers Against Sewage recently sent me a little some statistics that during their beach cleanups, they analysed the waste that was produced, and so if we get deposit return schemes, then I think that it may make a lot of difference to all our statistics. Thank you.
Councillor Viney.
Can I have a follow-up? Yeah. So if I'm interested in this, and we spoke briefly about this before, where do I go to investigate this further?
So you can go through the lead member first, which is Councillor Daniel. If you've got specific questions, if you want it to come back as a specific topic to this group, you can put it forward when we come on to the next session.
Sorry, Councillor West.
Just out of interest, when we're talking about the Surfers Against Sewage, beach waste and all that sort of thing, are there any statistics around the impact of our tourist industry in terms of people coming from outside of the area, holidaying, not bothering to recycle, they just chuck everything out? Is there any way we can, I know because I live next door to a holiday home as such, and whereas some people there are very good, other people just dump out the sacks. I mean, is there any, for us, because of tourism and everything else like that, there is an impact. We know South West Water is talking about making sure that visitors are aware to save water and everything else like that. I mean, are there any statistics around, is there an increase in the summer, i.e. the amount of recycling goes down as a proportion as the whole? Any seasonal trends?
It's a really good question, and I don't know the answer to it. I know that in terms of holiday homes is a specific issue. It's certainly a very big issue in South Hams as well, where we know, so it depends on the type of holiday home and whether they are just an Airbnb or whether they are a business-rated property. But if they're a business-rated property, advertising, running a business as a holiday home, then they have to have a waste collection provider. It's the law. Now, what actually happens is a lot of them don't, and they put a little leaflet in their holiday home that says, we don't have a bin collection, put it in the public bins and so on. And so we're thinking about how we communicate, whether it's through the holiday home agencies and so on, to try and get the message that they're part of the solution as well, rather than just ignoring. And it's a bit like we don't have very many litter bins with separate recycling things, because the amount of contamination is so great that actually none of it can be recycled anyway. It all goes to general waste. So because people just don't follow the instructions.
Okay, just a point I did wonder. Thank you.
Any other questions? Let's carry on.
Okay, and the final batch of measures are all really focused around our contact centre performance and channel shift, call volumes. So the first one is contact centre calls answered within 5 minutes. And we set a target of between 60 to 80% for this measure as a good indicator of performance. And for this period, we were at 76.6% of the, you'll see further down, of the 10,971, I think it was, calls that we received to the contact centre. So if I go through all of these measures, and then we can take questions on block around the contact centre. Revenue and benefits calls. So we have a separate call channel for revs and bens calls, and you'll see that 59% of those were answered in 8 minutes, and that's primarily because of the complexity of the calls that you're likely to be reporting. So, you know, the main call centre, I've got a missed bin collection, okay, we'll pick that up for you. Revs and bens, as you'd expect, much more in-depth conversation. And, okay, people are waiting longer, but it means that they're getting through to somebody that can actually help them with their query, which is the most important aspect of that. And then the final one around the call volumes is just the number. So 10,971 calls received during this period, which you'll notice is a lot higher than Q1, primarily because of voter ID and elections. We always see a bit of a peak there, and we do typically get a peak in Q1 due to calls through as council tax bills goes out and those sorts of things. So happy to take any questions on the contact centre.
Will there be some questions about this? Yeah. Councillor Casbolt.
I've got only from personal experience, as I've worked in a call centre before, but as a member of the public ringing in, do we feel it's acceptable for them to be waiting on the phone for 8 minutes? Or longer?
Do you want to take that one, Steve, as that falls within your service area?
Yeah, I'll answer. So, is it acceptable? No. I think this comes back to the same point that Councillor Elliott raised earlier, is how many of those are waiting over 8 minutes? Because if you look at the detail, a lot of them get answered in sort of the first 3 or 4 minutes, but then some wait. So if you take, and you've got 5 people who can take council tax and housing benefit calls, those queries tend to be quite complex, in-depth queries. So once all those people are on the phone dealing with them, so those calls might get answered really quickly. The next one then might wait 20 minutes because all 5 of those queries are really complex. So it's sort of an average statistic, and I think it would be more detail which shows the profile of how many calls get answered in the first minute, the second minute, the third minute, and then 20 minutes, for example, then you can see the profile of actually how big a problem is it. But you cannot resource, as I'm sure you'll know, we cannot afford to resource the contact centre. We can't predict demand, and we cannot afford to resource the contact centre up for the peaks. We have to try and work out what the average is. We are changing our staffing arrangements from September so that the revenues, council tax and housing benefits team will take the calls directly themselves. At the moment, those calls go through to the contact centre, and there are limited people with that skill set because it is quite a complex area. So what we're doing is we're opening that up to the back office team, as it were, the people who process on the computer system, the applications. They will take the calls directly. We've taken some of the resource out of the contact centre to boost that team. So we're hoping that that's one of the measures that's going to reduce the time frame, because the people with the knowledge will be answering the calls and hopefully be able to deal with them a lot quicker. So that's one of the measures we're doing. But it comes back to that, looking at the next level of detail down on what's the profile of when those calls are answered.
So will there be an overflow? So you mentioned that those 5 specialists may all be on a call.
Yes.
rather than having that sixth person waiting for potentially, as you mentioned, up to 20 minutes, could that not go to an overflow person that is aware that it is for the other department, where they can take some basic details and get that moved on? Because there's somebody at home, they put the phone down after 5 minutes because it's just ringing and ringing, then they try again, and it's ringing and ringing, then they try again later on, and it's constantly ringing, and their frustration builds up, and it then looks poorly on the council.
So we do that, and we also have a process, and I'm not sure what the time frame is, but after so many minutes, the option of going to voicemail and leaving your details, and we will call you back, comes in as well. We also, on our website, if you go to any of the main council service pages, it tells you the average time we take to answer the phone and when our busy periods are. So we try and manage demand as much as we can, but obviously people just pick up the phone and ring, and it tends to be a Monday, unfortunately. So.
Thank you. Any other questions? Let's talk about online.
Just very quickly, as a final measure in this report, Chairman, yes, so we do monitor the percentage of processes started online versus on the phone. Target is 80%, and I'm pleased that we are consistently above that. With a new website going live September, October this year, to make it easier for people to do it online. I think we've made massive improvements over the last couple of years on that front to make it easy. We've invested in the right technology to make our forms online easy to follow and easy to complete, but more of that to come with the new website.
Thank you. Any other more general comments or online comments? Comments about the online system, Councillor West?
Colleagues will get to know me. I'm a bit of a Luddite when it comes to online and websites and everything else like that. And I know that within our ward, there are a number of people who do not go on the internet and everything else like that. And I'm very conscious that the direct person-to-person contact for Kilworthy has been reduced further to 1 day. Are there any statistics about the number of people coming through the door within Kilworthy House and outcomes around that? Because that is still an important element of our contact with the public. It's not all about websites. They won't solve everything because some people have not got access to websites or online.
Yes, that is recorded. Everyone who comes through the door at Kilworthy, and the reason for their visit, the number, and so on. So we're collecting all that data. I think Mr. Molyneux, a further review is pending of that service via Kilworthy Park. But of course, we should also consider that, this is a very large borough, so we need to apply that question across the whole borough in terms of accessibility to our services. That is a challenge, very much so, but we have moved that on. We've now got locality officers visiting residents who perhaps need that extra help to complete a form or whatever it may be. So we have introduced that to try and, to make sure we are accessible. It is a challenge in a very rural borough, but I'm not sure if we've got anything in the diary in terms of a further review of the service desk downstairs, but certainly that is something we need to look very carefully at and find ways of making sure that people have access to our services.
How do we identify those people that need going out to? Is that through a phone, them phoning and saying, I need help with this? And people
Absolutely, yeah. They would typically phone in, and then we would, during that conversation, if it's identified they need that additional support, that would be the trigger.
I think we also have the option as councillors to refer people. Certainly worked for me very well. Any other comments on that? Or more general comments?
I think that's been very helpful, certainly, I think from our point of view, and I hope you've found it of some benefit as well. This is really important stuff. This helps you to understand how well the council has performed. That's absolutely key in terms of what we do, representing our residents. So it's vitally important we understand how we're performing against these measures. okay, we're not providing all the information that you would need, but what I think it has done, it's prompted the right questions. And I think that's healthy, and certainly we'll take that away and look at that. But, that's what I like about these things. Okay, it's perhaps limited in some cases, but it concentrates the mind and encourages the right questions. I think that's the important thing. The important thing is we're talking about it. And so we're looking to increase the frequency of these reports. That's the recommendation in today's report. So I hope you'll feel that's the right way forward. But yeah, and any further feedback would be most welcome. So we will work at this. This has been an ongoing process. Mr. Hawke has worked incredibly hard at building this up through the corporate plan. It has been challenging, but I think we're now making good progress, and I think this session will move us on again in responding to the conversations and the questions you've asked today. So thank you for your input.
Thank you very much for your time and for explaining all those things to us. I think we've got two kind of outcomes, haven't we? One is improving and refining our performance indicators. And then perhaps we might want to look at housing in more detail. So do we talk about that when we look at the work programme, do you think? I think I had to tackle it, yeah. So we'll carry those forward to the work programme.
Chair, you've just reminded me, and some of these conversations would also fit very nicely into your respective advisory groups as well. Not just about the data, but about some of the questions that, some of the challenges behind that. And I think there's there's certainly some good opportunity to have those conversations in your advisory groups to see if those things can be brought forward into this committee, into Hub Committee, or whatever. So I think that's really important to keep raising these things, and there will be opportunity in various areas of the council. It's not just this committee, but we've got council, Hub. You can attend all those meetings and ask questions, and certainly your advisory group.
Yeah, thank you. We do have to think carefully where the work is done, don't we? So we have a recommendation to note. It says the Overview and Scrutiny Committee notes the key service performance of the Council are set out in Appendix A to this report. And number 2, the intention to provide more regular updates on the KPIs to the committee to ensure more timely reporting of data. Are we happy to note that? We're happy to note. Thank you very much for your time. The final item on our agenda is the annual work programme. So, as Mr. Molyneux told us, there's an unlimited number of things we could look at, really. So, is it a good time to have a discussion, do you think?
I think so. I mean, I think the debate that we've just had has been helpful in terms of a couple of things. Talking about temp accommodation being one of them. The leader mentioned Fusion, Live West, but really, I guess, having gone through the KPIs, it's an opportunity for members to say what they think the topics are that we should be covering.
Yeah.
And my proposal, Chair, would be if we have a bit of a session now where we get some ideas, I will then go away with Mrs. Hoare and we will work out and come back with a list of what's achievable, put forward a suggestion for the next committee, and then bring forward a proposed work programme for the committee to review at the next meeting.
Yeah. That sounds like a good plan. Are there any thoughts about what we would like to look at from you, please? Councillor Southcott.
One of the things I brought up last year was South West Water's pollution activities in the Southwest, and I'd like to know what they're going to do to reduce the pollution risks in relation to new planning applications because of combined sewer systems that are, consistently popular around the West Country.
This is where you think they're not taking proper account when they're consulted. Is that right?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Any other areas of work we'd like to look at? Councillor Vashon.
Thank you, Chair.
One thing I've been looking at over the past 4 years, it relates to antisocial behaviour in the area. We've had quite an increase of that over the last couple of years, and I read a couple of reports a couple of years ago now regarding what causes antisocial behaviour, and some countries, particularly in New Zealand and Australia, had learned that it was a lack of learning how to be creative at an early age for people. And they discovered that people who had learnt to be creative and artistic had more empathy for their community. They could understand that any actions they did would have an impact on their community. So there was a reduction when they actually implemented this and gave children more artistic training. They discovered that there was quite a reduction in antisocial behaviour because of that. Obviously, it's a long-term thing. It takes maybe 20 or 30 years to actually come in. But one of the problems we had with education, probably about 20, 30 years ago, was they dropped a lot of the arts in favour of the academic subjects, and we are now reaping the benefits of that. I believe by the antisocial behaviour that's actually coming on. The education have obviously responded to that, and they've brought more arts in, but I think it's something that we could actually encourage more within our community to teach people to be creative, not only at the junior level, but also at an old level, because antisocial behaviour isn't just graffiti on the walls and things that the young people do. It's also, it could be dog fouling, it could be fly tipping, it's all those sort of things, and those sort of things are impacting us as a council, and it's something that we could look at for future years to reduce our costs on. One example of the training that is given is in the HMP prisons. They now do quite a lot of teaching of art within prisons. They're teaching prisoners but they're teaching the inmates there to be creative, and they've measured a response from that the reoffending rate is actually reduced by 14% as a response to that. But I'd like to see something that we could do. I don't know what it is at this stage, but it's something perhaps we need to look at that we could do in our area to reduce antisocial behaviour. Thank you.
Do you have some useful sources for that kind of thing, so we can learn more about it?
Yes, I've got several reports. I can circulate those too.
Perhaps they could be shared in the members' bulletin. Yeah.
Okay.
Councillor West.
On that point, it would very much fit in with the first section on the aims and ambitions for the council in terms of developing and enhancing youth programmes. And I think I would like to know exactly what is out there, because that has been cut back so much in various ways. And I think part of what you're saying is that we look to encourage those youth groups and that to get involved in those sort of activities which we feel has the most benefit and impact in terms of antisocial behaviour, etc. So I'm fully supportive of that, and I think as a group we would be. I'd just like to come back to the first thing about sewage. I actually feel that we have a role perhaps to actually begin to make people aware. I mean, I don't know where we stand on this in the council, but in terms of sewage being released into rivers and everything else like that, do we have a role to make, not necessarily comment on it, but make people aware of the levels of it and what's going on with it, so that people can form their own judgments around sewage discharge, and in that way create some pressure on South West Water. I'm interested, Steve, to note you said about the fact that you can invite these people along to meetings, to hub groups, that sort of thing, but they don't have to turn up. And to me, just the whole question of accountability of some of these organisations is incredible that they can just do that. So I would say that we need to look at that a little bit more challengingly, perhaps, with South West Water. It's fine. I think we do have to look at what goes on and how they do it. That could be all about road services, making sure that any driveways are permeable, let water soak in, opposed to run off into drains and everything like that. So I think there's some work to do there from that point of view. So I think that would be my thoughts on that.
Thank you very much. Any other? Councillor Elliott?
So I'm not quite sure how this fits, so I'm just trying it out as a possible topic. So I know that biodiversity and increasing biodiversity is part of the plan for West Devon, but that clearly is going to cut across a number of different sort of service areas. And I don't know whether it's the place of this committee to say, can we review what we're doing and how we're progressing in terms of biodiversity? Because clearly that also relates to the sort of sewage issue, that if you've got sewage going into rivers, that's going to be polluting and it's going to reduce the biodiversity in rivers. So is there a way of looking at a topic like that in the round?
So in the past council, we had regular reviews of the council's key priorities, of which climate change and biodiversity is one, as Mr. Powell said, housing is another, where we can call a lead member forward and say, okay, give us an overview of where your plan is and what you're doing and what's going to happen by when. So that's perfectly reasonable to do that. And, well, yeah, you wouldn't use the advisory. Yeah. You bring it up. Yeah.
Councillor Viney.
Yeah, just to, sorry, just to follow up on that, a topic that has emergency in the title, I feel should be discussed every time we meet. Housing, biodiversity, climate action.
Yeah, they certainly need to be taken into account. I'm really interested in picking up on what our communities are doing, because the more you speak to people in the community, the more groups you find. Biodiversity, for example, I found a new whole area near where we live where they're just working together to improve the biodiversity. I didn't even know about that. So how many do we need to be supporting our residents in what they're already doing as well? The question. I think Councillor Saxby's got something.
Yeah, hi. So this is still really new, so sort of like learning, but I think saying for people that could be brought in and things we should work on, staying in contact with Devon County Council, potentially getting our councillors to come in, members of their service, just not to grill them or anything, but to go, hey, I understand we have the largest road network, how is that going? Are we regularly filling in potholes? It's actually maybe having an impact here on public transport, or there's been accidents here, and just staying well connected with Devon County Council as well, because they do cover such a huge area.
Yeah, that's a really good suggestion. Thank you. Councillor Renders.
Thank you, Isabel, for taking away what I was just about to say about the roads, because it seems to be the biggest gripe that people from within my ward seem to have, and going right the way across Dartmoor. So it would be quite nice to get Devon County Council in and just ask them what their intentions are, and if we could put some timelines on them and perhaps put some more pressure. I think it's a good way of doing it. But she beat me to the draw. Well done.
Morning.
Just picking up on what Councillor Viney said about reviewing things at every meeting. In terms of, take housing for example, a report pretty much goes to every hub committee which has something on housing and what the council is doing to housing. So I would be loath to have this group reviewing the same things, but you may want to consider what's in that report and then say, actually, we need a bit more detail, or we'd like to see more done. So I think that's perhaps the way to look at it. But as the committee gets going, so this committee follows the hub committee, normally 2 weeks later, I think. So the hub committee will have discussed housing. You may then come to this committee and go, do you know what, that's not enough. I'd like to see more. But I'd like to think that those things, and then the other corporate themes come, every quarter? There's a report every quarter, Neil?
They get reported quarterly to Hub, yep.
Well, council strategy is reported quarterly, and the key actions against what we're due to trying to achieve, we're reported sort of, again, red, amber, green, as to whether we're on track with those actions. Now, obviously, that was based on the previous administration's plans. The new administration is now currently looking at those plans and going, what do we want to do differently? What are we carrying on with? So that's going to be reformed, and we've got a plan. Leader, I'm trying to think the time frame, but I think we're looking at redoing those corporate priorities in November, December, so that I think in January this council will have this vision of what they want. So in the meantime, we'll carry on reporting to the existing priorities, but the new administration will have its own view of what things it wants to take forward. Leader, am I right?
Thank you. Councillor Daniel?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to pick up on the transport issue, and I've mentioned before, I think about us having an integrated transport plan that doesn't just involve roads or active travel or public transport or how people get around the borough, but we look at it as a whole and be a bit more holistic about what we plan when plans come forward. We look at it from a transport point of view, and it doesn't just focus on everybody having a car, because I think that's the way we've been going for many years now, and we need to stop and re-evaluate that. So I'm wondering if there's any room for that sort of thing within our forward programme. Thanks.
Thank you very much. That would be good. Councillor Edmonds?
Thank you, Chair. All very good suggestions and all very valid. Though I tend to think there are sort of established routes already in place to bring these forwards. Biodiversity, JOP review, and we've got, and I'm sorry if I sound like a broken record, but we've got advisory groups, for climate crisis, housing crisis, and so on. So there is an established platform route to bring these things forward. I think we need to be careful about duplicating effort. And if we stick to the established channels for raising these items, they'll be more focused and more likely to achieve, what we want to achieve. They're all very valid, but I think we just need to make sure that they go through the right route so that they get the focus they deserve.
Yeah, I think it is worth listing them all, and then we can consider the best way to review them. Take it from there. So, Councillor Saxby?
Okay, I have two questions. So how are we going to list all of these concepts and ideas we want to work on? Who's going to list them?
I'm going to list them, and I will share them with the chair. I'll make some suggestions as what we put on the next meeting in October, and then the list we will then circulate, and they'll be published as part of for the agreement of the committee for the next meetings after that.
Okay, cool. That makes sense. So really, just to mention with what Councillor Daniel said about thinking about West Devon and thinking about it from a borough perspective and sort of joined up thinking. One of my constituents actually mentioned this, the ex-estuary trail has been really successful and it's increased economic activity in the area. So if we can, and then this leads on to the other thing I was thinking of. I know, so I've got quite a large area and a lot of people living in it. Business units came up a lot, not massive business units, but I don't know if it would be possible for the council to have their own public business units or ones that are affordable for maybe jewelers or small groups of people, or like the Men in Sheds movement, but something along the lines of affordable business units for local people who have really small businesses.
Yeah, I think I would add into that like shared workspaces.
I was going to say that Councillor Jury is the lead member for economy. I mean, the council does have its own business units that it rents out, but for us, the issue at the moment is acquiring the land to build business units. I think we could build small business units and we could fill them. The issue is, can we get the land at a price that would then make it, that we could then afford to do it? I mean, we still have lots of vacant space in Kilworthy Park. Now, whether we can look at how we divide that up, and that is set up, it's not business units, it's more office space, but is there any way to reconfigure that? I'm unsure. But Councillor Jury would have that lead, is the lead for economy. So again, we can ask Councillor Jury.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Saxby, Councillor Squire.
I can't resist saying this, but about 36 years ago, this council supported what was known as the West Devon Environmental Network, which was a group of voluntary bodies and the council working together. The word climate change hadn't entered into our vocabulary. It was about environmental damage and disrepair. And there's another councillor in this room sat on that and worked on that body. And that body fell into disrepair. But it's not a novel process, and it's one which history shows us we need to keep attention to. So the West Devon Environmental Network will be in the annals of this council's historical archive.
Thank you for reminding us. Any other ideas for work?
Just picking up on what Councillor Squire said then, I mean, we've sort of overlooked it a bit, but this council can't do everything. It has to engage with community groups, that third sector, to work on some of these things. Because if we try and do everything, I think we'll fail. We just don't have the resources. And there's lots of groups already doing stuff. And what we need to do is work on best practice, make sure that that's shared across what is a large geographic area. We need to help and enhance those groups rather than just try and do everything ourselves, because we can't do everything ourselves. So I'm picking up on that point. I think it's a really valid point.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just on the subject of climate change and biodiversity, just to point out really for members, perhaps new members, we've got some high-level actions in a plan for West Devon. We've also got a standalone climate change and biodiversity strategy. It's got lots of actions in it which are underway. They're budgeted for, we're delivering on those. We've also got the Devon Carbon Plan, which the sort of the community groups and all the other experts have had input to that. So we are revising our strategy to align with the Devon Carbon Plan, and I think that's where we'll get maximum return in terms of investment. So there's lots going on, not all of it, which you will see at this stage. And I think the process that Mr. Molyneux described earlier on about development of the new corporate strategy will be the opportunity to refocus and redirect resources towards perhaps new priorities of the new council. It will take a few months to do that, but no one sat on their hands in the interim. We're carrying on delivering on those wider pieces of work, and we will report back to members. Hopefully you'll see a lot of activity that you're not aware of at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, Councillor Elliott.
Yeah, so I just wanted to follow up on the comment about the number of community groups, etc., and Councillor Kimber saying we're not necessarily aware of all those groups and how we become aware of them. So this is a very genuine question about whether this committee has any sort of budget to commission some external body to do some work, because we've obviously got a lot of information in our heads, but these days you can get people to do web scraping and do particular ways of like doing a whole roadmap of what groups exist within West Devon that we could then be more efficient in engaging with them and be more aware of where we might need to do some action, because there aren't groups, or we might need to sort of encourage there to be more work at community level. So obviously we know about things like parish councils, etc., but we just don't know about those sort of ad hoc groups that start. So I don't know if that's something the council has done in the past, whether we could do it in the future, and whether this committee is a place to author it at all, sponsor it.
Thank you for that. And it's actually something we're grappling with at the moment, is how we carry out that mapping. I mean, we work closely with West Devon CVS, who are the sort of organisation that support voluntary groups across West Devon. So we will be doing some work with them in the coming months to look at that. So any thoughts from members, welcome, because you're right that our voluntary sector groups and just community groups might not be constituted, but those groups are doing great work across West Devon, and it's important we know that they are there and what they're up to, and is there any opportunity for us to support them and enhance what they're doing further? It's not about us going in and meddling, but is there anything we can do to support them? So we're certainly putting some steps in place to take that forward. So we haven't got the answer today, but in the coming months we will.
And I think Councillor Mann has sent an email suggesting we look at wildlife wardens as well. It's a similar thing. So, Councillor West?
I'd just like to think, picking up on what Steve was saying, it's like anything, it's about facilitating and empowering these groups to actually support the work we're trying to do. And, you know, that engagement is so important with them, to give them that permission, if you like, to actually work with us and the communities to deliver on some of our objectives.
Thank you very much. I think Councillor Saxby's.
Yeah, actually, this is probably, yeah, definitely. I think, especially in my ward, I leverage these community groups. I try to not tell them, but I'm like, have you considered this? Or maybe we could try this, because they're already doing the work. And I think as a councillor, you kind of link up these groups and you share names. And actually, you contacted this person. And sometimes I think these groups are established because, as Councillor West said, they may feel that we should empower them. And I think sometimes they feel disenfranchised at what government is doing and they go, we can do a better job. And sometimes they are. Now, to build on what Councillor Elliott said, and obviously I've done work with West Devon CVS, I think that's what they're called, and they've come to the parish hall before. This is probably very crude, but I'm just spitballing an idea. What if we just set up a Google document, a shared Google document, and we titled like Beer Alston, Hatherley, and everyone's different location, and then underneath we wrote down our community groups and a short description of what they do. So then if potentially, you know, with Ursula Mann wanting to do her wildlife wardens, she can access that document, go, okay, there's this group in Hatherley, this group in Beer Alston, this group in Tavistock North. I can reach out to them individually. This is just a shared Google Doc we could all update, because sometimes small groups disappear quickly because maybe they lose energy or enthusiasm or funding, and then a new one pops up. But that's just an idea. So you don't have to do the work. We don't have to outsource it, but we can all populate a document with this evidence. Just a thought.
I like that thought. So, Councillor Vashon, should we take your point, but I just think perhaps we could finish fairly soon.
Yes, it's relating to that actually. I mean, it's a very good point. Having contact with all these groups can be through the parish councils. Now I think we're still having a conference in the autumn with all the parish councils, which replaces the Links Committee. And I think this probably is a very good topic for that to take forward.
That would be great. Councillor Casport?
I just have one point. I don't know which committee, but apart from the fact that I would imagine it would be under the planning committee, or whether it's a total overthought from West Devon. Whilst I'm not the councillor for Oakhampton, I do travel to Oakhampton quite a bit, and I've got relatives and friends around the area. And I find it strange that we are expanding Oakhampton at vast rates of knots, but the roads going in and out of these new estates, the pavement or the footpaths are not being linked up. So people are coming out of an estate with potentially a mother with children. They are walking 50 yards round the corner. Then they are having to then venture onto a fast-moving A road with 40 and 60 mile an hour speed limits, when surely within the planning application we should be telling people that they should be linking up these footpaths to allow, whether it be cyclists or parents taking kids to school, and not having people walking out onto the road.
Shall we take Drew's point as the final one?
Thank you, Chair. You're absolutely right. There has been situations where I must admit I've been quite astounded that we've allowed development to develop sort of incrementally and not done the join up. We're dealing with a very difficult case at the moment where you do have the situation where the actual developers, landowners have their own little disputes and have their own little bits of ransom land where they want to not allow things to happen. It is difficult, but our job is to make that join up at JLP level, strategic planning, and when we give permission. So absolutely agree with you, and it's something I'm making sure, we'll make sure that officers are more aware of the link up and not to look at things in isolation.
It'd be nice if we could finish the meeting fairly soon. Will you be quick, Councillor West?
Very quickly, you can see the results of no joined up thinking on pavements in Dowsland within the Borough Tour ward. You've got people in their 80s, 90s having to go walk on the main road to get to the bus stop or to go anywhere off that little bit of estate. And it's something that I would want to bring in terms of what we could do about it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we're going to put together a list of these things and suggest a work plan and take your input on it. But it's not too late to suggest something else. So we will close the meeting now. So it'd be nice to get home. So please carry on feeding back. And thank you very much for your contributions. And good to see you all. Thank you.